on It's Supernatural. Throughout history, Israel has faced impossible odds. But during the Six-Day War, see how a miraculous wind exposed a minefield to allow the Israeli army to pass through unharmed. And how one battle that took place 3,000 years ago repeated itself with the same miraculous results.
Do angels exist? Are healing miracles real? Is there life after death? Can people get supernatural help from another dimension? Has the future been written in advance? Sid Roth has spent 25 years researching the strange world of the supernatural. Join Sid on this edition of It's Supernatural.
Hello, Sid Roth here. Welcome to my world where it's naturally supernatural. I'm going to talk about a miracle today, a series of miracles that defies any logical explanation. 48, you just saw some video footage of the war, of Israel declared a nation and 12 enemy armies attack it one day later. They didn't have an army. I mean, they were merchants and shopkeepers in the arts. They didn't have guns. They had a few guns. 12 well-armed armies attacked them. They should not have survived from day one. My guest, Hollywood film producer Bill McKay. Bill, I am told that West Point refuses to study the battles of modern-day Israel. Why?
The probabilities cannot be calculated. The experts at most of the military institutions, including West Point, have literally written off the battles of 1948, 56, 67, and 1973. They said we can't run the calculus on why.
Is there anyone, to your knowledge, that gave Israel a chance of any of the modern-day Israel a chance of any of their major battles?
As I went back to study all the major wars and the formation of the modern state of Israel, there wasn't one military expert in the world or major military power from the Pentagon to the Kremlin that would have put money on Israel's survival. In fact, they were unanimous in their predictions that Israel was going to fall in each case.
Now, why did you decide to do this movie against all odds?
Well, the genesis of my experience with Israel and this particular television series goes back many years. I've traveled Israel now 67 times in my life and all over the Middle East. And I know many of the enemies of Israel. I have spent an inordinate amount of time doing documentary filmmaking with the terrorists in the Middle East. So I've gotten to know the Middle East and the Israelis through the prism, if you will, of terrorism. My first real big project was back in the 90s for the British Broadcasting Corporation. They'd asked me to produce a television series to basically explain the Oslo phenomenon, because at the time everybody expected the Oslo peace process to actually bring peace in our time.
Yes, but the title was Vanishing Peace. You did the opposite of what everyone expected.
Well, that's exactly right.
And by the way, the Oslo Accord, this was one of the first meetings to orchestrate a two-state solution or peace in the Middle East. And everyone was optimistic except Bill McKay.
Well, initially we did not have a prejudice one way or the other. We thought that it was just another effort, if you will, by man to paper over the very complicated issues between Arabs and Israelis. And so our job, our task by the BBC, was to simply chronicle the events that were leading up to this grand moment when Bill Clinton and the world leaders were going to celebrate what was the thorniest political issue in modern history. Well, when we got halfway through the interview process, we realized there was no peace. There was no there. The politics of this process was an utter sham. So I called the BBC up when I got back to Jerusalem and I said, you're likely not going to want to have this conversation. But I said, Oslo is a sham. It will not produce peace in our time. And the British, as they can only be, said, well, yes, Mr. McKay, you're right. We don't want to have this conversation. And the net result was we terminated the agreement. I financed the rest of the picture. We went on to edit it, and the BBC actually got a rough cut, came back to me, and were so astounded by the quality of the journalism and our ability to document our prediction that the worst intifada Israel was ever going to face was going to be as an outcome of the Oslo peace process. So they rebought the program from us. We titled it then Vanishing Peace, The Aftermath of Oslo. Now, this was released before Taba failed.
Now, from what I understand, many top Israelis, from Mossad officers to politicians, were amazed that the BBC ran this film of yours. Why?
Well, as you know, many of the leaders in Israel are secular humanists. They're atheists. They don't believe in God. They don't have the little curls and worship and all the rest. So for them, their Messiah, if they have one, is the M16. And when they saw that I was able to get Vanishing Peace on the BBC, which by many experts may be the most anti-Semitic political organ on the planet, next to Al Jazeera.
That's why I thought BBC would never carry something like this. You must have been a hero in Israel.
Well, Israel assumed that I was walking in the footsteps of Moses parting the Red Sea. At least that was their words. As a result of that, Sid, I developed some very close relationships with the heads of state in Israel, prime ministers, generals, the head of the Mossad, and interesting things started to happen. One night I was sitting in a Tel Aviv hotel.
Tell you what, hold that thought. This started Bill McKay in an investigation of miracles that are equivalent. When I say a great miracle, I'll say someone without an arm and the arm grows back. That is a great miracle. The miracles that he investigated with due diligence, with several witnesses for every miracle, amazing, amazing, equivalent to an arm that's missing growing out. Don't go away. We'll be back right after this word.
We'll be right back to It's Supernatural.
Israel was born out of the ashes of the Holocaust, yet Israel was just one day old when it was attacked by 12 surrounding armies. They had only one tank and 5 cannons, yet Israel won. How? This anointed motion picture documents supernatural and miraculous interventions by God that allowed Israel to overcome their enemies time and time again. Call now to get Bill McKay's motion picture docudrama on DVD, In Search of a Miracle, Against All Odds, for a donation of $30. First class shipping is included. Ask for offer number 1177. On this DVD, you will discover the supernatural wind that uncovers thousands of Syrian landmines, allowing 9 Israeli soldiers to escape from sure death during the Yom Kippur War. You'll be moved by the amazing story of Richard Nixon's divine encounter with God as a child and his historic intervention as president to save Israel from sure annihilation. Learn about God's supernatural intervention when only 7 Israeli tanks held back hundreds of Syrian tanks bent on destroying the nation, and so much more. This motion picture has made believers out of many who once questioned the existence of God. Don't miss out on getting Bill McKay's motion picture docudrama on DVD, In Search of a Miracle, Against All Odds, for a donation of $30. First class shipping is included. Ask for offer number 1177. Call now, or you can write to Sid Roth. It's Supernatural. Post Office Box 1918, Brunswick, Georgia 31521. Please specify offer number 1177 or log on to sidroth.org. Call or write today.
We now return to It's Supernatural.
Hello, Sid Roth here. Welcome to my world where it's naturally supernatural. I love the rarefied air of heaven, and you're going to find out about miracles that few people have ever heard of. My guest is Hollywood film producer Bill McKay. And Bill, by the way, just as a little aside, you're working on such an exciting film. You're working on the sequel to The Passion of Christ, picking up at the resurrection. Just briefly tell me what this is about this.
Well, about 1.5 years ago, I was in a meeting with the heads of Sony Pictures, and we were putting together some other picture deals. And at the end of the meeting, this head of the studio turned to me and said, I have a script you ought to read. It's about the life of Jesus. Would you be interested? And I said, well, there would be 3 conditions. He said, what are they? I said, well, number one, it has to be shot in Israel. I said, every motion picture from Cecil B. DeMille to Mel Gibson has been shot everywhere but the place where the story took place. He loved the idea. He said, what are your other conditions? I said, it has to be faithful to the Bible. And he laughed. He said, well, I'm Jewish. He said, I have not much knowledge of your Bible, but he said, my experts tell me it is. He said, what is your last condition? And I said, it's time to have Jesus portrayed as a Jew. I said, we need to deal with the biggest lie that has been perpetrated on humanity, that he is an Anglo. He belongs to the Jewish people, and it's time to tell that story. So we're now in the early stages of pre-production.
Let me switch gears right now because of time. And we were talking about the movie you did for BBC on the Oslo Accord. And that gave you great favor with top leaders in Israel. Late at night, they began to say the last thing you expected from secular, atheistic Jewish people. What did they say to you?
They said, we've seen things on the battlefield that we cannot quantify in a scientific test tube. We don't know how to explain it. What we do know as military experts is that we should have been dead on that battlefield. Or Israel should have lost that battle. Or Israel should have lost that entire war. And yet the outcomes don't measure the circumstances that we experienced on the battlefield. So as I began to investigate the surrounding elements, several things jumped out at me. Number one, going back to the Old Testament, I found that in many cases, Sid, they were fighting on the same battlefields that Joshua and David and other greats fought on. You had the same protagonists, the same antagonists, and the same supernatural methodologies employed by the Holy Spirit 2,500 years ago as you did in 1967 or 73.
Let's talk about one which was amazing, with these angels with flaming swords. Tell me about that.
Well, interesting story. There is a very small town in the northern part of Israel that has been inhabited by Jews since AD 70, when General Titus came in and sacked the city. And Jews have made a determination that this is the land that was given to them by God through Abraham in a covenant. And so there have been a series of family generations that have lived in this same city and coexisted with the Arabs to prove God's purpose and plan. And just prior to 1948, the Arabs decided, they knew the politics was beginning to shift, the British were planning to leave, and so a group of Arabs determined that they were going to wipe out the last vestiges of these Jews that were living in this city. And as they plotted their plan, the rabbi's house was surrounded by the Arabs, and they were coming in to burn them out. And as they made their way in the middle of the night, and as they got proximate to his home, they saw 7 large angels with flaming swords at the ready. And every one of the Arabs scattered for fear of what they were dealing with.
But some of the other things you verify in your film, you think that's amazing. That's a nothing compared. What about the minefields? Is that unbelievable? Set the stage for the minefields.
Well, 1973, the Golan Heights, the Syrians were in control, and a group of Israelis, tank commanders, were sequestered from their units, and they were surrounded by Syrian tanks. And they were looking for a means of retreat because they were outgunned. And as they were preparing to make that retreat, one of the commanders realized that they were in a minefield.
What is the probability of them hitting one of these mines?
Probably 99.9%. I mean, they were.
So why didn't they just retreat?
Well, because they physically couldn't walk out without triggering a minefield. So it wasn't just a matter of.
So they were trapped.
They were trapped.
They painted themselves in a corner.
Yeah. There was no exit strategy possible anywhere possible. So
I'll tell you what. In the next segment, I'm gonna let you see some of this amazing, amazing footage. But how do you know this story is true?
Well, there were eyewitnesses to the story. And
but did you find eyewitnesses?
Yes, we did. I actually had searched all over Israel to try to find the man that was in charge, the commander of that particular unit. And I couldn't go with the story on television unless I had found him particularly to authenticate this. And I was very discouraged because the story is remarkably powerful. Came back to the United States. I was in a production meeting, and Matthew Crouch said to me, "My father, Paul, knows a man up in Seattle. I think you ought to talk to him. He would likely know some others that might give you stories for our series." So the connection was made, and in the middle of the phone call, it turns out David Yaniv was the commander that I was looking for.
What's the probability of that?
Well, again, it's the same probability.
One person in the world.
Absolutely.
The one person in the world that he needed, he just happened to talk to on the telephone. I'm going to tell you something. The miracles you're about ready to see are equivalent to everything you've read in the Bible. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this word.
We'll be right back to It's Supernatural.
When Jesus prayed that they all may be one, there were only two people groups, Jews and Gentiles. Denominations did not exist. 2,000 years later, his prayer is still yet to be fulfilled. God's purpose from the beginning was for all nations to become one in Yeshua, Messiah Jesus. To break down the middle wall of separation dividing Jew and Gentile, so that the world may believe that Yeshua is the Messiah and Lord over all. When Jewish spiritual DNA merges with the New Covenant Christian DNA, there will be what Paul called life from the dead. That's why Sid Roth's website is loaded with cutting-edge articles and teaching about the one new man. Log on to sidroth.org today.
We now return to It's Supernatural.
Hello, Sid Roth here with Bill McKay, and we're talking about the miracles in modern-day Israel's history. Our service academies, West Point, refused to study these wars because the results are too improbable. If there's no God, there should be no Israel. It's that simple. And Bill, you were talking at the last segment about you bumped into the one person in the world that could verify some major miracles that were going on in Israel during its modern day history. And we were talking on the Yom Kippur War. I mean, a war that Israel should never, ever have won. They're praying in the synagogue. Golda Meir, from what I understand, was preparing plans for a government away from the nation Israel. Things were so bad. At this Yom Kippur War, there were some Israelis that were trapped, and you found an eyewitness about the minefields. Explain that again, and then we're going to see it.
Sure. David Yaniv was a colonel in the IDF, and he was a commander of this small tank force surrounded by a Syrian armada of tanks. And he was in the middle of a minefield. So the options were absolutely limited. And he then ordered his men to get out with their bayonets and tediously go through the dirt to try to lift out these minefields and then disengage each and every mine systematically.
How deep were the mines?
They were over 30 inches deep into the soil.
How do you find, I don't know anything about this, but how do you find all of these mines?
You do it by simply getting down on your hands and knees and crawling through the dirt, and with your bayonet, like an archaeologist with almost a feather-like touch, going through to find it, because if you trigger one of these things, not only you, but your entire company would be blown up.
But then a windstorm, which I understand is highly unusual, occurred. Tell me about that windstorm.
Well, as David described it, he said that at that particular time of the year, and the ferocity of the storm was so great that those great Sherman tanks, he said, I stood next to my tank, and he said, I saw the thing rocking off the ground. And the wind
was rocking a tank?
A tank. And he said by the time the wind passed through this valley, 30 inches of topsoil had been blown off of the land, and he said we could see every single mine.
What's the probability of a wind of that magnitude?
Well, even more important, at that particular moment in time. It's not that there aren't great winds, but at the moment that David needed it, his men needed it, the wind was provided by God. And he then saw the exit strategy because he knew where the mines were, and then they were able to escape.
I'll tell you what, this changed the destiny of Israel. Let's look at this reenactment right now.
עצרו! עצרו, אנחנו בשדה מוקשים!
סמק! לא עושים עכשיו.
שקט אילן, אתה רוצה להוביל לפה את כל הצבא הסורי? זהו, אין כבר דרך חזרה.
אבל אין שום סיכוי שנצא מהשדה מוקשים הזה בחיים. נו, לפחות נמות כולנו ביחד. זה לא מצחיק לך.
יש כאן איזה 100,000 מוקשים. לא חייבים לזחול את הדרך שלנו החוצה. קדימה, להוציא את הכידונים ולעשות מה שלמדנו בתרגולת. קדימה, ברגע שמגיעים למוקש, אנחנו חופרים סביבו, מוציאים אותו בזהירות ומנטרלים אותו. זאת הדרך היחידה שלנו לצאת מכאן. קדימה.
אם לא נספיק עד הזריחה...
אנחנו נספיק עד הזריחה. קדימה. לפעול בזהירות.
Sid Roth here with Bill McKay. This is absolutely phenomenal. But if that were the only miracle, it'd be phenomenal. But the miracles keep increasing with intensity. What does a Jewish person that doesn't believe in Messiah, even an atheistic Jew, think when they see these documented miracles?
Well, as you know, most Israelis are secular by definition.
Sure.
They're not religious. And that's true for the most part in the United States. And it's been interesting as this show has been shown in Israel and in the United States, the reaction among secular Jews is absolutely electrifying. I mean, my sense is Jews are spiritual by nature, even if they are not attending synagogue and are committed to their religious values. There's something innately spiritual about their character. And when they see something authentic or something that sparks that supernatural touch inside of them, there is a recognition of truth. And I'll tell you, some of the best reactions I've had to this series have been from secular, non-believing Jews.
I have to tell you, I am overwhelmed at the miracles that Bill has collected. Very briefly, maybe in less than a minute, you were supposed to die. In fact, you died on an operating table as a child. Tell me how God did a miracle in your life.
Well, in 72 seconds or less, my mother and dad were advised by the surgeon that I had died on the operating table and that the nurse had prepared the death certificate. And for reasons he could not explain, I came back to life. And she said to the doctor, Jesus can heal our son. And with a degree of anger, he looked at her and said, "Woman, you have not heard a word that I've said. Your son will not live." And with that, they went down to the chapel in the little West Covina Hospital here in California, and they got down on their knees, and they prayed until they touched the hem of his garment. And they got out of that room and knew that God was going to raise me up. I went to Los Angeles to recover at the Children's Hospital. My Jewish doctor, Dr. Koch, had taken care of me for 30 days. And as I walked out of that hospital, I can remember this, he put his hand on my shoulder. In those days, they called me Billy. My dad was Bill McKay also. And he said, Billy, I must tell you, we did nothing to aid you in your healing process. He said, this Jesus that your mother and dad pray to, he's the one who healed you. And then a year later, the same pain that had caused the 2 prior surgeries came back. And the surgeons wanted to do the surgery all over again. And my dad prayed, and the Lord said, no, I've given you a promise that your son will be healed. And we then went to the Dima Shakarian Full Gospel Businessmen's Convention in Phoenix. We got there, we were late, the doors were closed, there was no room left. The ushers would not let us in. My dad and I stood at that door for 20 minutes. And the usher came back and said, Dima Shakarian had 4 guests that he was preparing for this evening. They're not here. Would you like to come in? And we walked in and sat down on the second aisle. And Billy Branham was preaching. And he stopped in the middle of the sermon and he looked down at my dad, who was sitting next to me on the aisle. And he said, sir, 3 times.
He knew nothing and he was instantly healed. In Jesus' name, I pray you be instantly healed now, right now.
Israel was born out of the ashes of the Holocaust, yet Israel was just 1 day old when it was attacked by 12 surrounding armies. They had only 1 tank and 5 cannons, yet Israel won. How? This anointed motion picture documents supernatural and miraculous interventions by God that allowed Israel to overcome their enemies time and time again. Call now to get Bill McKay's motion picture docudrama on DVD, In Search of a Miracle, Against All Odds, for a donation of $30. First-class shipping is included. Ask for offer number 1177. On this DVD, you will discover the supernatural wind that uncovers thousands of Syrian landmines, allowing 9 Israeli soldiers to escape from sure death during the Yom Kippur War. You'll be moved by the amazing story of Richard Nixon's divine encounter with God as a child and his historic intervention as president to save Israel from sure annihilation. Learn about God's supernatural intervention when only 7 Israeli tanks held back hundreds of Syrian tanks bent on destroying the nation, and so much more. This motion picture has made believers out of many who once questioned the existence of God. Don't miss out on getting Bill McKay's motion picture docudrama on DVD, In Search of a Miracle, Against All Odds, for a donation of $30. First-class shipping is included. Ask for offer number 1177. Call now, or you can write to Sid Roth. It's Supernatural. Post Office Box 1918, Brunswick, Georgia 31521. Please specify offer number 1177, or log on to sidroth.org. Call or write today.
If you're encouraged and helped by these television programs, please consider assisting us with future productions. Send your tax-deductible gift to Sid Roth, Post Office Box 1918, Brunswick, Georgia 31521. Call toll-free at 1-800-548-1918 or visit our website at sidroth.org.